Welcome everyone to another episode of the EV Owners Lounge. Today we're joined as usual by Mark and Sham from Mobile Array EV. My name's Alex, I'm their social media marketer, and for those who don't know, Mobile Array EV allows hosts to share their charger at home or their business to other EV drivers that are bookable through their innovative and easy to use app. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Jordan, EV Guy. He is someone who gets a lot of negative comments online, let's just say that. Someone who gets lots of interesting comments. I was just reading through them earlier, actually. You must have very thick skin, Jordan, but did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Alex, and thank you for having me on. So, yes, I am the EV guy for my sins. I do invite a lot of that negativity, but I like to tackle it. I like to educate people. Essentially, the EV guy, as a brand, as a company, is supporting companies with any inquiry they might have into the EV space, into the energy space, educating, marketing, and yeah, just generally helping the industry in any way that I possibly can. And yeah, it's going quite well. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, no worries at all. Just to let everyone know as well, this is an interactive session. So the idea is that we can help you guys out there who's watching. Any questions that you have, drop them in the chat on the respective platforms that you're on, and we'll do our best to answer them during this session. So yeah, where do you want to begin? We want to cover all things that are EV myths today. Range, charging, what happens with your EV in the winter? Is it doom and gloom, or is it just myth busting?
I think Jordan probably has a good handle on what the top 4 myths are that come across. So range and batteries is probably one of them for sure. I was actually, when I was at the British Motor Show, Jordan, and I was with Estelle, who runs EV Experts dealership and she told me off after I explained that there's more battery technology coming and things are going to get better. The reason she told me off is because as soon as you put out there that there's new technology, people put off buying the existing cars, and her main business is selling used EVs. So she didn't need anybody telling people that that new battery technology was coming along. So, but what do you hear about range and battery technology? And
yeah, I think if we're honest as an industry, we have to be open to the fact that the technology is advancing at a rapid rate. It changes by the week, by the month, and in 5 or 10 years' time, things will be very different to what they are now. That isn't to say that the current used options available aren't great cars. They can last you as long as they need to last you, especially with things like less maintenance, less servicing, and we're already seeing first generation cars doing well beyond the average of a petrol car, which according to multiple sources, it's about 11 to 14 years, and EVs in the first gen are going beyond that already. Now, imagine what EVs will be capable of when they are second and third gen cars. When it comes to the myth around range, it's very much along the lines of they don't go far enough. I'd have to stop and charge it constantly. Nobody's got time to sit for 4 hours and charge their car, and it's just an ill-education part on the anti-EV crowd that we see, or I see on my socials quite a lot. When you break it down, you take a step back and you take a breather and you actually stop and think how many miles people do a day. An EV currently suits most people. According to Mobility Ways, the average commute in the UK is 19.5 miles, which is less than 40 miles a day. So running an electric car, even on the lower end with a range of 150 to 180 miles, you would be quite comfortable in running that car for a full week without even needing to think about charging it. The average EV in the UK now does 235 miles of real world range, which would put you well beyond charging it once a week, sometimes once every 2 weeks. So the range is there based on the average amount of miles that people do. And obviously, if you are one of those select few that does more miles, then the infrastructure is there, which is one of the myths that we'll come on to later on.
Yeah, it's weird actually, because I do know of a number of people that had an EV as a company car because their company decided to go green, and they're reps, and so they do a lot of mileage, as a company car, and they were kind of forced into it, to be fair, but they found a way of working it work, right? It's not something for you, because the reality is you have to stop, and the older you get, like me, you have to stop anyway to and the 10-15 minutes putting in a rapid charger it's probably all you need to get to the other end anyway.
Yeah.
So but also, one of the things that we're trying to do with Mobile Array EV is that because we realize that the ranges of cars are getting longer and longer, 600 kilometers, 400 miles is, and as you say, it's getting more and more and more. I think partly because the noise is there that the range is not long enough, right? Even though, it's horses for courses, as you say, with average commutes being quite small.
Yeah.
But mostly what people will want to avoid doing is actually charging at these rapid chargers. It's the same as avoiding going to the motorway services to put in petrol because the price is terrible, right?
Yeah.
It's no different for a rapid charger. The price is terrible. I'm sorry, but it is. So you want to charge when you get to your destination and do destination charging, as they call it. And that's where we are trying to open up, businesses and private chargers, so you can charge when you get to your destination or wherever you stop for 3 or 4 hours, right? So, so we've made a focus not just on community charging, which has been traditionally where peer-to-peer charging has come in, but also destination charging. So partnering up with businesses and with other organizations to make that happen, which hopefully we will have some good news in the coming weeks on some new partnerships that we're doing there. So one other thing I wanted to say is that I'm trying to buy. Well, I haven't quite persuaded them yet, but I'm trying to get my parents-in-law a Citroen Ami, right? The quad cycle.
Yeah.
So they don't need to get a full license. And it does, I think, 50 miles range or 45 or something. And I think it goes 30 miles an hour or something maximum, or 40 miles an hour, something like that. But it's perfectly fine for what they need, right? So everybody has an option out there.
That's it. I think it's very much choosing the car that suits your lifestyle. Like for me, previously was a Model 3 rear wheel drive. I'm not ashamed to say that. My new car is a Model Y rear wheel drive. Again, not ashamed to say that. The reason for that is, yes, I know the industry and I know what car works for us, but I didn't need the extra range. I didn't need the speed of the performance. So going for a model that suits you, whether it be a Tesla or whether it be something else, is very much the way that it needs to work. Don't worry about needing a car for 400 miles of range, because you can charge it at home, you can charge it at work, you can charge it en route. And coming back to what you were saying, last case or worst case scenario would be to stop at a rapid charger. But even if you needed to, there's now over 70,000 charging stations across the UK. Obviously, a lot of those are made up by GridServe and by Tesla superchargers. But if you can charge at your destination, or you can leave home with a full charge, you're cutting out the majority of that major cost of motoring, which is the fuel.
Yeah.
I think overall, in terms of the adoption or the myths around battery range and all that, I think it's use case by use case, because you find that a lot of the shorter journeys or the longer journeys, irrespective, it's trying to cater for everyone. It's going to be difficult, but I think at the initial will be is that initially there may be a phase where you're moving to, you have two cars, one is electric, one isn't, one is for the longer route because you're not confident, and then slowly you transition into fully electric cars at home. That's also I've seen happening as well. When we were at the British Motor, some had two, and some had one just for long range because they had all the infrastructure and everything mapped out. So it all depends on the use cases to understand where you're going to apply it and how you're going to apply it, and understanding that before you plunge into it is a very important part of adapting to it.
Yeah, I do see a lot of people that plunge straight into an EV from an ICE car and they absolutely love it. And then obviously on the flip of that, you get people that are quite hesitant, or they realize it's a little bit of a shock to the system and they kind of like feel a little bit of a negativity towards it. Now, again, it does come back to the point of doing your research when selecting your next car. Researching the market, researching the cost, researching can you charge at home, where would you charge it if not? And a lot of the time I think it comes down to experience. The more experienced you become as an EV driver, the easier it gets. And going back 5 years when I first got my first electric car, the first couple of weeks are a little bit scary. Where do I charge it? How long will it last for? And you very quickly start to learn about your own car, your own driving style, where you can charge it, where your main routes are. You commute to work and back 5 days a week, and at weekends you tend to go to the similar sort of places. If you've got kids, you might go to a play centre or something like that. And most of us have a life with a routine, and we do the very similar things week by week or month by month, and the confidence does grow after that initial shock of going into an electric car. And obviously we're seeing quite a high uptake of hybrids at the moment. September saw a record month for hybrids, and people are seeing that as a bit of a stopgap. They're testing out, can they use electric, how many miles will they get from their hybrid battery, whether that evolves into taking a full EV in their next car, we'll see. But I think, yeah, it's just growing in confidence, having the education, having that comfort in knowing that you can charge, you can get the range. And we're seeing it in the real world, despite all the misinformation and all the negative comments. The real world of EVs is thriving. EV drivers in the main, I think 95% of EV drivers love their car and love the experience and love the thrill of having an electric car. So real world is very different to what we see online.
Yeah, I mean, I without sounding like a zealot, I'm not a big fan of hybrids because they don't really solve the problem that we're trying to solve, right? And the reason we set up Mobile Array EV was to help the mass adoption of EVs to reduce carbon emissions, right? And a hybrid doesn't really do that. I mean, it can if you just popping along to the shops or something, and you don't go into the engine part. But I've my brother had one. I think one of my board advisors had one, and I was shocked how often they just got into the routine of not plugging in, and they were just using it as a petrol car. So
Yeah.
it's not to me it's not doesn't solve the problem. So anyway,
No, well, just on that, my dad recently went into a Hyundai Kona, full electric, absolutely loves it. But previously, he had a BMW 3 Series hybrid, and he was very much of that opinion that this is just pointless. I'm doing 30 miles a day, I'm charging it at home, it doesn't need to have an engine. He very quickly realized that he could get rid of that car and went into a full EV, and he's now obviously benefiting from charging from home, no fuel cost, etc., etc. And yeah, he was one of those that realized that hybrids were a little bit useless for what he was doing, and yeah, he's gone full EV now.
Yeah, no, it's good. So what's the weirdest myth that you've had to bust? And then we'll answer this question. If there is a question.
To be honest, I get the full array of myths. I think we've moved away from EV car fires a little bit now. I think as an industry, we've tackled that quite well with the education out there, with the data around it, with some of the new safety devices that are coming out. And they kind of moved on to more of the silly stuff. There's things like EVs can't handle it in winter, and the infrastructure is not there yet. The chargers are always broken. And one that I always get is, why would I want to queue at a charger for 3 hours and then wait 4 hours to charge? And it just, honestly, it grinds my gears. And obviously, it's an opportunity to educate people and give them the actual information.
You can see the gears grinding now.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of the time, they're kind of just saying that to get a reaction. They're not going to listen to your response. They're not going to go and check out the data or listen to the experts or someone that's an experienced EV driver. They're just saying it to try and either convince themselves or convince somebody else and feel like they've had that little win online, which is kind of strange.
Yeah. What's really annoying to me is that when I this was, and it really ground my gears as well. I listen to TalkSport a lot for my sins, and I heard Dean Saunders, who is the Welsh footballer, right? And he I don't know where he got it from, but he basically repeated the line that the EVs are to blame for the potholes in the roads. And it's not like I hadn't heard that myth before, right? Because it's obviously there are heavier vehicles than EVs on the road that cause potholes, and the lack of investment is actually the reason there's potholes, not EVs. But what made me grind my gears is where and how did he hear that? Is it down the pub, or where did he hear that nonsense from that he feels confident enough to repeat it on national radio? That's the bit that really
that is the problem, Mark, and we're seeing people repeat things without actually looking into them. A lot of them, and this is why I post a lot of the content that I post. I did a post a couple of weeks ago on Autocar doing the headline around diesel cars outselling EVs, and they'd pulled the little tiniest piece of data out of something that could have been so positive, almost in a way to make EVs look bad. And I know it, and everybody else watching this will know it, that people will start repeating that headline, regardless of the facts, regardless of whether it's true or not. And we do see people repeat things. The pothole one, the multi-story car parks being flattened due to EVs one. It came from the Daily Mail, surprisingly, and they actually had to post a retraction months later, apologising for the misinformation. Now, the misinformation retraction got 0 views, 0 reach. It was a tiny little article in the back of the newspaper, but yet the pothole one was a full spread. And lo and behold, people still repeat it to the day.
I mean, it's interesting, Jordan. There's a lot of technologies that have come and gone in the last sort of 4 or 5 decades, and we can name loads of them. But one of them that stands out that's going to prevail is electric cars. It's without a shadow of doubt. Consumer has given their vote without giving a vote to it that they want EV cars. There are people who are procrastinating and resisting it is purely because they just don't potentially have the right knowledge or information or data, and they've heard someone from XYZ source that they trust, but they're not authenticating that source, and they're just going on and spreading that as a wildfire. I mean, and there's all these other technologies that have come and gone, but I certainly think that the electric vehicle is going to stay in.
It's kind of weird, Sham, because when you look at releases of this thing, right? What do people talk about? They talk about what's improved in the camera, or the fact that the latest one has got AI built in, or they talk about the good things, the additional things that this device brings, the latest one, or the foldable one, or whatever it is. When you bring out an EV, a really groundbreaking one that has like the Hyundai Ioniq 5N, which is as fast as a Ferrari, right? And what people talk about still is this negative stuff, and instead of talking about the positive stuff, and that's I can only believe that there's an element of lobbying, fossil fuel led detractors in the media, in particular media's outlets in particular, that are actually causing this. And in the same way as Jordan is fighting this, in his way, Quentin has been lobbying and fighting this from at least 2 years ago or more, that this misinformation that keeps coming out, and he's had to go and effectively go one by one to inform the MPs and the people that make decisions in Parliament to make sure that they're not taken in by this myths and FUD.
Yeah. I mean, Mark, on that point, if you remember when the iPhone came out, I think it was it 2007, if I'm correct from memory, everyone who Nokia and BlackBerry Pro put negative comments for many years. But now, if you think about it, the car itself has, and initially the reason why it was because it was a status symbol of your success, because if you've got a BlackBerry, it means you're a businessman, you're successful. Now, if you think about cars relates to your wealth, your status symbol that, you're wealthy, or you got a certain status within your social environment where you are, or how you perceive yourself with others. Now, electric cars, because everyone's been so common towards ICE, they understand it. Even if you don't know anything about cars, you know which brand is more higher priced. Now, when something comes new, underlying the badge may be the same, but the value has changed because it's electric, and it's almost like taking them away from the correlation of status of where they think they are in the car itself. Whereas the iPhone, that myth has got busted now after 3 years. Electric cars is going through that generation of phase changes where they can't correlate with their wealth status to electric car. Once that's transitioned, I think it'd be relatively easy. The naysayers will go away or reduce.
I think obviously at the moment, we are seeing the transition live. We are fortunate enough to live in a time where we will see something as big as a huge transition away from one type of car to another. Not every generation will get to see something like that.
Yeah.
With that, we have to deal with the fallout. We have to deal with the negativity and the bickering from both sides, which is better, and all that sort of stuff. But one of the things that I always say, my children will never have this situation where they'll have people telling them how rubbish electric cars are. They'll never have people telling them that diesel is better, diesel is king, because diesel won't be around when my kids are driving cars. The norm will just be to have an electric car or whatever else is on the market at the time. So yeah, we are going through the transition. I think a lot of people need to just take a breather, just step back and just realize how large this transition is, how long it's going to take. There is going to be pain points. Nobody ever claims that EV is perfect or EV is for everybody. It is a large, very large transition. It's a very big change. It is scary for some people, and we understand that. But that doesn't mean that we have to face all this misinformation on a daily basis.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the things that you've been answering quite vociferously, and there is some element of truth to this, is that some of the OEM vendors, I'm thinking of BMW and in particular, but others as well. I think some rumors around Volkswagen Group as well have kind of, their CEOs have been coming out with somewhat partly less optimistic, skeptical viewpoints of the electric transition. And it's interesting because Stellantis, which is also a big player in electric, has actually gone the other way and not tried to fight the 2035 and EU transition, but have actually basically said they're going to reduce the combustion engine manufacturing so they can meet the percentages that they need to meet for each year that's coming up. So I think this year in the UK, it's 22% of the sales need to be electric. So rather than fight the deadline and the other thing, and I think that kind of market sentiment, which I think is not entirely related to electric, I think it's just in Germany itself as a whole is got a downturn and is not economically is got some outlook that is not great, and everybody still jumps on, well, it's the electric car's fault, it's the Chinese electric imports fault, it's everybody but their own industry's fault as to why this is not happening. I was wondering because you've looked at this, I think, a lot more than I have, so I was wondering what you thought.
Yeah, obviously we've seen the likes of Volvo, and I prefer to call it like a re-strategize. We've seen them have quite ambitious targets. We've seen them have quite ambitious strategies, and then 2 years later, change them, which then becomes ammunition for the anti-EV crowd. It becomes misinformation. And we saw this quite recently with Volvo, where they re-strategized, they amended their strategy to meet current demand, to meet future demand, and to meet their model internally in terms of production and things like that. And it very quickly became Volvo have scrapped EVs, Volvo aren't doing any more EVs, Volvo won't produce any more EVs, and it kind of snowballed very quickly. And you can kind of see it happening live when you're on social media as much as I am, LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. You can see the posts appearing. You can see it becoming more and more misinformed. You can see the posts becoming more aggressive or less factual over the coming days. And it isn't just Volvo. We've seen it across the industry. We've seen them all re-strategize. We've seen a few of them struggle. We've seen the Chinese manufacturers, particularly BYD, come out with high quality, low cost EVs and almost make the legacy automakers a little bit embarrassed by their own offering. The likes of BMW, that has been seen as a premium product, the Mercedes has been seen as a premium product, but that comes with a premium price tag. You can now get an electric car for 20, 30, 35,000 pounds that comes with the full bells and whistles on it. It's got full leather interior. It's got a nice dash. It's got everything as standard. But yet when you go to a legacy manufacturer, they all come with additional costs. You're up at 40, 50, 60,000 pounds for an equivalent standard of spec, which is why we've seen a lot of pushback to the Chinese brands, because the legacy automakers, they can't keep up. And they should have started it 5 years ago as opposed to starting it 2 years ago. Maybe they would have a more of a of a level playing
I mean,
field.
we're very lucky in the UK because we haven't as yet put tariffs on Chinese imports yet. So I would recommend everybody go and have a look at some Chinese cars.
Yeah, well,
Because
just
at
just
some
while
point,
we're on BYD, I've got quite a strong connection to BYD Sheffield. I'm down there quite a lot. I've test
yeah,
driven some of their cars. One of the things that surprised me the most when I asked the head salesman down there was obviously around this insurance piece, around cars being repaired through minor accidents, and he didn't understand what I was asking him. He was like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, people say that EVs can't be repaired and they get written off by insurance companies." He said, "No, we've got a 24-hour turnaround on parts." So they're shipped from China within 24 hours, whether it be a bumper or a rear bumper or something like that. Repairs are happening within 24 to 48 hours at BYD, and that's right across the UK, which means that this insurance misinformation around them being written off is, again, slowly going away, but it's taken quite a lot of education to tackle that.
yeah, it's interesting because I think what people don't realize is that BYD is not a new company, right? One of the CEO of one of our partners, Smart Car, who is based out in California, he's just down the road from a NASA center, and he when he was growing up as a kid remembered BYD running electric buses in the NASA center. So that was decades ago. Well, I don't know how old he is, but it was a while ago. So they've been building batteries and electric vehicles for a long, long time, right? So, and all around the world. So they're probably quite used to the logistics and the supply chain that's actually needed to go and supply their vehicles, in all around the world. So that's good to hear. So, but I would, you never know when the tariffs may come because they may change their mind because it's interesting in the US, and obviously, I used to live in the US for 10 years, 12 years, and they have basically there's no Chinese imports there.
Yeah.
They've unfortunately managed to do a tariff job on them so that the Chinese can't effectively import yet. Although I think they're going to build some factories in Mexico and import them that way.
Yeah,
So,
we're about to see something very similar. I think looking at a factory in Mexico and a factory in Turkey, which will effectively cancel out those tariffs. And whether they find a new way of taxing them, we'll see. But yeah, I think they're all running scared from BYD.
yeah, because the Teslas that are built in China have the same subject to the same tariffs. So because obviously some Teslas are built in the US and some are built in China, believe it or not. So, but it's interesting because when Mercedes used to build their M class in Mexico, you could tell the build quality was a lot less good in the cars in the US than those built in the southern states of the US. So.
Just wanted to sort of conscious of time as well, but in terms of the one thing I wanted to make a comment on is how the EV trend is expanding, and I think we also got to consider is if we do the initial analysis of your use case of how you're going to apply it, there's other expansions other electric mobility coming our way as well, especially for the last mile solution as well, where you don't need a heavy EV car or you don't need a heavy ICE car. You can use something small and nimble for your last mile of whatever you're doing, either from a commercial point of view or personal point of view. And I think that's also something people should be aware of, really, because there's all the electrification tools and vehicles out there which could be not a fully car vehicle type solution, if that makes sense. And I think that you shouldn't underestimate that as well as a solution to your needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going back to Mark's comment on the Citroen Ami. It's using the right vehicle for your needs, and you can actually go one step further than that when you look at the mining industry, where you've got, is it Liebherr excavators in mines, and we're using electric vehicles in mines. We're using electric vehicles to transport minerals and materials. So yeah, right from last mile deliveries all the way up to extraction of minerals, we're seeing electric vehicles or e-mobility in some form.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, well, I've seen them in boats. I think I've seen them in vertical takeoff vehicles, as they're called, or OLEV TEV, or whatever they're called. So they'll come along as well. It'll be what's that cartoon with the futuristic thing. But yeah, anyway. One last topic I wanted to cover, Jordan, was depreciation.
Yes.
And I know that you've got some associations with salary sacrifice, because I think the reality is that some of these vehicles are high end and cost money. And I think the reality is that whether that's an EV or it's a combustion engine, as soon as you take it off the lot, if you take a Maserati Quattroporte off the lot, it's going to lose 40% of its value.
Absolutely.
You take an EV off the lot, high end, a Tesla Y or something like that, it will probably lose 50% of the thing. So I think what most people are advising at the moment is that's the one. Thanks, Leon. eVTOL. I couldn't remember the exact acronym, but so the PCP, lease, or salary sacrifice. Find other ways that you're not the one that's having to pay for the depreciation. And I think you've got some experience in that, and I just wanted to get your...
Yeah, depreciation comes up a lot. It's one of the things that the anti-EV crowd like to try and use to scaremonger other people away from EV. I think it requires another step back, another deep breath, and just think about what is happening, how large this transition is. When you do take a step back and you realize that the ICE market has been around for 100 years, EVs only became, I say, back popular in 2019. People will say all the time, "Oh, EVs have been around since the 1800s," and it's a very different form of technology these days. The charging is very different. The battery technology is very different. But it hasn't had time to what I call steady out. It hasn't had time to be less volatile. We're still seeing advancements in technology, advancements in charging and battery technology. And in 10 years' time, things will look very different. We will have a period where the used EV market will have a chance to steady out. New technology will be at a point where it's starting to peak. But yeah, it does. It gets fired around a lot that EVs appreciate. And when you actually look at the data, I think Auto Trader put a report out several months ago looking at that. The average EV only depreciates 12% faster than the average ICE. Now, obviously, you can separate the EVs into two categories. You've got the normal price, affordable price EVs, and then you've got the high end stuff. And when you actually look at the data, the high end stuff depreciates a lot faster. Now, there's reasons for that as well. Businesses get tax breaks on taking EVs. So which EVs do they take? They take the high-end Mercs, they take the Porsche Taycans, they dump them onto the used market, which then obviously has an effect on used prices, and depreciation is a little bit higher in those types of models. But on average, the difference between depreciation between EV and ICE isn't too dissimilar when you look at something like a Tesla Model 3 compared to a 3 Series, for example, which is the car that people tend to compare the most. I think you're probably looking at no more than 5 or 4% difference in depreciation on those type of cars when you compare them directly.
Yeah, I mean, some of the used cars out there are rental companies that have decided to move away from EVs, which is weird. Because I've rented a couple of EVs recently, and actually they're cheaper than the combustion cars to rent, although harder to find.
Yeah.
And they, talking to them, and this is anecdotal, so there's no science behind this, but they're basically saying that the sheer instant acceleration has caused them accidents and problems more than anything else, right? So the difference in driving them, not in terms of plugging or charging in or any of that stuff. It was actually, you put your foot down and it suddenly goes, right?
Yeah.
And the power behind it is one of the main reasons that they decided to move away. And I keep thinking, surely there's a way of throttling that, but then you take away one of the main reasons why it's fun to drive an EV, right?
Yeah. Well, we have actually seen more recently some EV models are coming out with like what they call like a chill mode, sport mode, and you can actually harness that acceleration on some models. But whether that becomes standard is yet to be seen. But yeah, it is a little bit of shock to the system. That is one of the fun parts of driving an EV. And you mentioned rental companies, and obviously there was a big piece of misinformation around, was it Hertz getting rid of 1 million Teslas or whatever it was, something ridiculous. And when you go on the Hertz website now and you try and rent a Tesla, they've still got masses and masses of options available. They haven't got rid of all their cars. It was exaggerated. It was become a misinformation piece. And I had a similar experience recently where I was in between my Teslas. My Model 3 had gone back and my Model Y was yet to be delivered. And I went to Enterprise. Now I know, looking at their website, that they had EVs on their stock. I went into the branch, I asked them for some sort of electric car, and they were all hired out. They said they were so popular with people using them as like either a stopgap or they needed a car for the weekend. And the option to take an EV was there. They were intrigued by it. They were taking it. And I actually ended up in a petrol Merc for 10 days, which wasn't fun. Wasn't fun at all. When you go from an EV...
I went to a university reunion and I decided to rent a car. And I didn't want to go to Hertz, and which was the nearest centre was quite a while, an hour away. I wanted something local. But locally they didn't have anything that was electric. Enterprise. And I went to the local thing. I said, "It's a shame you don't have anything electric." And then they said, "No, we do. We have a Renault Zoe, if you want." But it wasn't listed on their website. It wasn't available. It's like they had it, but for some reason it wasn't there. So anyway, I think we've come to the end of our time. Jordan, is there anything you wanted us to shout out there to people and say?
No, just obviously I am available if anyone needs advice. Working with the EV guy takes away some of the pain points of trying to find what is right for your business in terms of things like sacrifice cars or charging. So yeah, my DMs are always open. My advice is always free. And just one last thought from me. We are coming up to winter. We are about to see all the misinformation around EVs don't work in cold weather, EVs don't work in winter. And again, take a step back, look at the real world data. I experience around about a 15% loss in my range on average. I don't see any significant increase in the need for charging my car during winter over the last 5 years. Again, some people will see more, some people will see less. But
I think what people don't realize is that you actually lose range and you use more petrol diesel in the winter as well. But it's not easily seen or measured, right? So, because very few people go and measure their miles per gallon between winter and summer, but people notice the percentage. Right. So, anyway, thank you very much,
You're
Jordan,
very welcome.
the EV guy, and the rest of the gang. So thank you very much, and we'll call it a day, and we'll see you.